Pandit Satish Sharma at this time, who has written a book actually about caste and the colonial conspiracy. So we will have him talk about
the women's entry into temples.
Yes, we will have him talk about his topic. And and it is sort of a continuation of what we just, discussed. And Pandit Satish Sharma actually has a hard stop. He has another meeting to go to right after this. So I will just, have to end this topic because it has spilled over at least 20 minutes. I apologize for this. I think we will work better at coordinating these sort of time limits that we have. It is sometimes very hard to, manage that. I had, asked Panditji to come for this session. Panditji, are you there? Yes. Panditji, namaste, pranams. And thank you very much for to the previous panel for, highlighting some of the key issues in India. Panditji, I want to quickly introduce you. You really need no introduction. We all know you as an eminent scholar of Dharma, as a Dharma theologian, and you have guided us in being a Dharma warrior, and fought issues in the United States where Hinduphobia was rampant, last year also on Oxford campus. Before that, on the caste issue. And your book on caste and colonial conspiracy has become, a guiding light for us to educate us on the various issues that are facing us at this time in the United States. But today we are looking at a more, dharmic lens. And Panditji, you came up with this new topic, Bharat, that is India. And I'm pretty curious to know what exactly that means. So I will hand over the floor to you right away. Thank you so much for joining us in this, with the time constraints that we have today. Thank you so much. I look forward to listening to you.
Wonderful. Can you hear me now? I was muted, I think. Is my voice coming through okay now?
It's coming through. If you talk a little bit louder, that would be great.
Is this any better?
Yes,
I will do my best to speak as loudly as I possibly can. Is that better?
Yes, that's good.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Richaji. And Pranamji, Namaskar, and Jai Shri Ram to everybody who's joining us today. Before I jump in, there are a couple of remarks I'd like to make. Firstly, Richaji, congratulations on pulling this thing together. A curry in a hurry, I think, was the description that you used for it, and I can see that this has been a very spicy concoction that we've made. I know how hard it is to put together a global conference, and so if there are any rough edges or there are any issues, then please everybody do be forgiving and tolerant and accommodating. So Ritaji, thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to talk for probably about half an hour to 45 minutes at the most. I would like to encourage anybody and everybody to think of any questions regarding the subject that I'm going to speak on. And when we do have a few moments to ask questions, I would love for Richaji, perhaps if you could just gather any questions and then either invite the speakers to ask the questions or present them yourself. I hope, is that okay?
That sounds fine. Thank you.
Excellent, Jay. And Chandralekha ji, Pranam ji, Namaskar. I was listening to your contribution on caste, and thank you for sharing those points about caste. I think we need to say it again and again and again. Slowly we will decondition our own family, our own countrymen, and then we can decondition the rest of the world. It's one of the most important things to do. So thank you for that. And my apologies if my slot was not more flexible to accommodate your closing remarks, but hopefully you'll have an opportunity to close at a future point. So I shall jump in now, and before I jump in I would just like to invoke a couple of mantra. we have the Sahana Vavatu mantra, which I'd just like everybody to perhaps think of. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahe Tejasvina Vidhitam Astu Ma Vidvishavahe Om Shanti Shanti Om. And in setting the context for what I'm going to talk about, I'd like to also reference one of our most important mantras, the Asatoma Satgamaya. We recognize that the journey of a human being is to move from asat, confusion, maya, illusion, mistaken understandings, to a clarity, a darshan. And I'm hoping that what we'll do today is move a little bit further. Now, the subject of my talk I chose was Bharat that was India. Richaji, my apologies for not clearly emphasizing the order, because that's quite important. And the context of my talk is that once upon a time there was a Bharat. That Bharat became India, and it was enshrined in the constitution. They said India that was Bharat, or that is Bharat. I'm looking forward to a time when we will be able to say Bharat that was India, because we are on a journey to reconnect the trajectory of the land and the civilization of Bharat back to where it was before we were bumped off our trajectory for about 800-900 years of systematic violence. So I want to talk about a future Bharat where we will be able to say Bharat that was India. When we will be able to say that is the time and the place in our history when we will have decolonized our own thinking to such a degree that we can see clearly what it is to be a Bharatiya. When we have removed from Bharat all of the vestiges of the colonial systems which were designed to prevent us from recognizing who we were. And that's the systems of education, but also the systems of the legislature. We still have a colonialist legal system which was created to prevent a Hindu majority from being treated as equals. When that is dealt with, then we will be moving towards a Bharat that was India. The Bharat that I think of was the Bharat before we lost a big chunk of Punjab, we lost an awful lot of Bengal. You know, those are the things, that trifurcation of our nation is really the beginning of what the world recognizes as India. That's what it defined, and that was an India that was born out of violence, and we're still coming to terms to understand that. There is a shlok in our Vishnu Puran, which when translated, it goes along the lines of, to that Mother Bharat who wears the Himalaya as a crown, who is adorned by rishis as gems, and whose feet bathe in the oceans. To that Mother Bharat I bow. So that's an ancient definition of what Bharat is and was, long before anybody else tried to define us. And that Bharat is the Bharat that I talk about when I say Bharat that was India. How did India appear? The India and the Indians who occupy it. Now, if you have a look here, I have a little picture, and this is a picture that an artist, a student of mine, drew for me after I described the process by which a Bharatiya is reduced, a Sanatani is reduced into an Indian. In our tradition, we understand that each and every Jivatma, every human being, is like a Hans, and a Hans flies on two wings. One is the wing of Vidya, knowledge, the other is the wing of Bhakti, devotion. So one wing represents the mind, and the other wing represents the heart. And for the Jivatma to fly, the Hans to fly, both of those wings need to be developed, they need to be strong, they need to be free to move as they're supposed to move. But when you want to create a humanity and a civilization which is enslaved without even knowing that they have been enslaved, what you need to do is to clip both of those wings. You need to cripple the Hans so that neither does its intellect work properly, it doesn't know how to think clearly, the reasoning is compromised, and you also need to compromise and clip and cripple the heart so that the courage that resides in a healthy heart is also clipped and prevented from moving forward. If you can cripple the head and the heart, then you can enslave a people and they never will know that that's been done to them. This is the India that was created, and the Indians who were created to continue in this manner. And on our journey now, we're on a journey to move from that India back to Bharat. We're on a journey of reconfiguring our own thinking, which is strengthening our wings. We're on a journey to become not guilty, to become courageous, not fearful. And that wing is also strengthening. And so I was giving this talk to some of my students, and one of them, who is an artist, he painted this picture. This was how he saw it: the hunts breaking free of the chains, and the chains are of ideologies which we call religions. The purpose of missionary religions is to cripple the intellect and to cripple the heart. And I'm going to talk briefly about how this is done. If we know how this is done to us, we're a little bit further forward in terms of reversing that harm. So how does one cripple the intellect? When I was 6 years old here in the United Kingdom, I was a small child in a Church of England school. And every Friday, all of us children, we used to walk to the local church, and there was a sermon every Friday of an English pastor would have a sermon and teach all of us children. And one day he said to me, he said, "You're destined for hell." And I said, "Oh, but I've not done anything, you know. Why will I be going to this terrible place?" And he showed me the image of a man being crucified. And when you're a child, the image of a human being crucified is a horrific image. In the mind of a child, you suddenly realize you are in a world where this sort of thing is done to other human beings, and it's a shocking, shocking experience. So when I went home and I told my mother and father, Mataji, Pitaji, I explained to them that this is what I heard today, and they said to me, they said, "Bete, have you done anything wrong? Are you guilty of anything?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Remember, if you know you have never done anything wrong, nobody can make you feel guilty. And somebody who is trying to make you feel guilty is committing an act of adharm. Never let them do it and never fall for it." And I learned two things at that time. One was that we are not sinners. We never were sinners. And nobody has the right to tell us that we are sinners. It is an act of violence. But I also learned how a human mind can be crippled in the same way. If a child is required to accept something at an age when it's vulnerable, when it will accept whatever an authority figure will tell it without reasoning, what you do is you cripple that child's faculty of thought. Because the child will accept. It will say, "Hang on a moment, I'm guilty, but I've not done anything. So I'm in a world where you can be guilty of something that you've got no recollection of. It doesn't make sense to me, but I have to accept this as a truth." And the moment that happens, your faculty of logical reasoning becomes crippled. That is one wing that is gone. And that wing, that faculty, that divine intellect that is given to us, that becomes crippled. Because never again will you be able to rely on your own faculty of reasoning, of critical analysis. You will always come to a limit, and at that limit you will abandon your reasoning faculty and accept unreasonable truths. And this is how the intellectual wing is crippled. How do you cripple the heart? The heart is crippled in a slightly different way. The heart is crippled by instilling guilt or fear into the child's heart. If a child believes he's guilty, he will always have his head bowed, he will always be subservient, he can never stand tall and be noble, because somewhere in the back of his thoughts and his mind and his heart will be, "I did something and I'm guilty and I have to pay for it. I'm a sinner." And the moment that is established into one's heart, then you can never stand up in your own nobility, confident and proud that you are a person who has a phenomenal lineage, you're part of an incredible heritage. Guilt is one way of instilling that, of crippling that second wing, that second bunk of the hunts. The other way is fear. If you tell a child that unless it does something, the consequences are so horrific that it's beyond the child's capacity to even comprehend, then that child is fearful. But if you can instill both guilt and fear, then you compromise the formation of a healthy personality. That child is traumatized deeply, they become sanskar. And how difficult it is to deal with the sanskars that we receive during childhood. And so that is how you cripple a jivatma. You prevent it from reasoning and you prevent it from feeling fully. And both of those are divine faculties. Now, the faculty of reasoning is divine. The faculty, our hirdayam, the faculty of prem and unrestrained anand, they are faculties of our heart. That is also divine. And yet both of them can be crippled. And instead of a hunts which can fly towards the sun, what you have is a hunts which doesn't even know that it can fly. And it crawls along the surface of the earth, wondering why it is that it's in such pain and it's in such discomfort. That life itself becomes an act of penance rather than an act of joy and celebration. So this is where we are now. We are in the stage of breaking the shackles, those shackles of both the intellect and of guilt and of fear. I hope that my little explanation has given everybody the tools to understand how the violent barbarians who came to Bharat actually functioned. The violence that they brought with them was intended to destroy or to reduce or to compromise both of those human divine attributes. When you have slaughtered so many people that you have got 32 kilograms worth of Janeu, that's a fearful experience, and everybody who sees it and experiences it or hears of it is shocked into guilt and fear, and is shocked into lack of comprehension. We can't comprehend it. In the same way, when people come and tell children, you are guilty by birth, that is something that again a child cannot understand and comprehend. And it's not a coincidence that these institutions which seek to cripple the wing of intellect and the wing of heart found schools. The reason they want to establish schools is because there is a personality and an identity which starts to form when a child is 5, 6, 7 years old. A child begins to get a sense of I am so-and-so, I am somebody. The personality project, as it's called by psychologists, begins. And if you can plant the seeds before a child can reason and defeat them and reject them, then you can control that child forever. If you tell that child to doubt is a part of the mystery and that God moves in mysterious ways and all of this nonsense, you can compromise that child's ability to understand and to grow every single day of his life. But you know, Dharma is incredible. Pranshakti is amazing. Pranshakti is always wanting to heal the mind and heal the heart. And so what you have to do is you have to clip the wings, both of the wings, regularly. You have to have that person come in touch with the person who is protecting this manipulative exercise once a week at least. You need to have that person come into the sphere of those who have created this human assault, this strategy for dehumanizing and crippling a human being. You have to come into their sphere of operation at least once a week. And so lo and behold, in Sanatan Dharam, we say you can sit at home and do your puja. You can sit at home and practice dharana, practice dhyan. You don't need to have the external regular influence because we nurture pranshakti and dharmic growth inside of a human being. We do everything to bring it out. But if you want to prevent it, you have to have somebody come into the sphere of the manipulator at least once a week. I hope this is now becoming clear as to what it was that was done to change Bharatiyas into people of Hind and then into India. In that time, whilst we were being reduced, instead of being creatures capable of soaring into the heavens, whilst we were being reduced to crawling on our bellies for survival, those who did this to us stole such enormous wealth and resources that even today we haven't fully quantified it. We know that at least $45 trillion worth was the loss to the Bharati economy during British colonial rule, and that's a conservative estimate. We know that our civilization lost at least 80 million individuals, and that is such a cultural deficit and a loss that we are still trying to recover from the psychological impact of that loss. These are massive figures, and it's worth understanding who it was who did this. There was a tiny island, and it's the island which Paramatma has chosen as my Karam Bhumi. For whatever reasons, my Prarabdha Karam must have been terrible, or wonderful, depending upon your perspective, that Paramatma decided this was going to be my Karam Bhumi. But here in England, at the time that we were charting and mapping the stars and the movement of the planets and the galaxies, here in England, they were bathing once every month, and the family would bathe in one bath, and they would bathe, the father would bath first, then the mother, then the children, and the baby would be the last one to bathe, all in the same water. And when they threw the bath water out, the saying arose, don't throw the baby out with the bath water. That's where this saying comes from. And that was the state of the civilization in the United Kingdom. Whilst we were constructing things like Ajanta, Ellora, the magnificent temples that we have all over Bharat, the most amazing structures, whilst we were carving the story of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata into the Shiv Mandir at Ellora, they're structures in the United Kingdom. Perhaps you've heard of the saying, it's raining cats and dogs. That saying comes from the fact that the structures used to have straw roofs. And when the fire was lit inside the house, the straw would become nice and warm, and cats and dogs would go and hide and rest in the straw roof. And when it rained, the straw roofs would collapse, and if it rained so much, the straw roofs would come down and the cats and dogs would also fall down. This was how advanced their domestic construction technology was. So they were a long, long way behind, and yet these were the people who came to Bharat, not to civilize us, but to take from us. And they came with malicious intent. And the journey of Bharat becoming India started. The United Kingdom has no natural resources, Great Britain has no natural resources, a tiny little bit of oil off the North Sea, no gold, no minerals. And so it's a very harsh environment here, tucked away on the Atlantic, a very cold ocean, on the edge of European civilization, a long way away from Rome, a long way away from Greece. It was almost the most extreme of European communities. And so they were truly describable as barbarians. And so those people who came to Bharat were the most barbaric of the barbarians. They were the pirates, whose job it was to steal from the trading ships and the ships that were sent out by the Spanish and the Portuguese to plunder the non-Christian world. Britain started its wealth by creating pirates to steal from colonialists. And those are the barbarians who arrived in Bharat. In the period of the Christian Anglican occupation of Bharat, which is what we should call it, it was the Christian Anglican occupation of Bharat. It wasn't the British Raj, which sounds glorious, it sounds like a Raja and darbars and everything. It was the Christian occupation of Bharat, Anglican Christian occupation of Bharat. In that time, we plummeted in every sphere because of deliberately architected famines. They viewed us as a resource. They shipped Bharatiya bodies all over the world to meet their empire needs. They sent them all the way onto the killing fields of Flanders to fight in 2 world wars, all the way to Burma, all the way to Malaysia. They shipped the sons and daughters of Bharat all across the globe as a resource, just to fill the coffers of Great Britain. And it's strange because now, when we walk around in Great Britain, it's almost like you're walking through a nation, and all of the monuments seem to be the proceeds of criminal activity. You know how in law there is the principle that the proceeds of crime should never be allowed to remain in the hands of the criminals who stole and broke laws to keep them. All of British monuments now are seen more and more as the proceeds of criminal activities. We have a monarchy, and the monarchies are hereditary, hierarchical, endogamous. Her Majesty, when she goes to take her throne, she makes a vow, she takes an oath to protect the Church of England. We have 26 bishops in the House of Lords. This is not a secular country. And yet the BBC and everybody else in Britain and throughout Europe, they say, oh, Bharat must be a secular nation, when their own nation is not secular. We're learning these things, and we're learning to deal and respond to these allegations. You must have heard of the notion of a Commonwealth. Can you imagine the cheek, the audacity, the incredible cunning that would say, after having stolen wealth, slaughtered the occupants of nations all across the globe, that we can now call them a Commonwealth? The only thing common about it was that it was all a resource pool for the monarchy on these islands. There was nothing which flowed the other way. What flowed the other way? The lie that they civilized us, the lie that they gave us governance. And it's a fraud, it is a lie. They did not give us these things. We have a much, much longer and deeper tradition of both human rights. Anybody who has studied Sant Basaveshwarji's writings, you will see the most incredible descriptions of how a democracy should work, and human rights are enshrined in it. So we had all of these things. They gave us nothing, they took everything away from us, and the Commonwealth is a carpet under which the greatest crime scenes against humanity have been brushed underneath it to hide it. And people are beginning to recognize this and now talk about this. These are the people who came to Bharat. They left us with an arsonist's inheritance. Imagine a person breaking into premises, stealing all of the wealth, and not wanting to leave any trace there. He would set it on fire. And what they did is they left us the ingredients for a fire which was civilizational and which would burn and prevent us from ever recovering what they had taken, but ever realizing what they had done to us. And that civilizational arson, the way in which it manifested was the manipulation of our social and educational structures. They compromised our traditional structures, but what they did do was they also created as many divide and rule fault lines as it's possible to imagine. And the arrogance and the barbarity is so extraordinary. Let me share with you a couple of quotes that I unearthed. Richardji, you very kindly mentioned that I'd written a book. I'm just going to show a description of the book. It's called Caste Conversion, a Colonial Conspiracy. And in there, my research, in my research, I've produced the evidence to be able to state that the ancient Hindu caste system was in fact created and first deployed by Christianist missionaries on the 4th of January 1844. That was when the conspiracy to create caste, to proliferate caste, and to enshrine it into our systems of governance and education was conceived. And the missionaries who had a conference, a little bit like the conference that we're witnessing over in Rutgers University, the same mentality was present in 1844. And they made the statement, Reverend Roberts made the statement, and this statement was, the only thing betwixt Christ and the pagan is this incredible institution of India. And the incredible institution of India that was being referred to is the Jati Varna system. And so they identified that unless we can destroy Jati and Varna, we cannot convert people in this nation. They identified that in order to undermine the religion of the nation, they needed to divide and rule, create a rift between those who had preserved the Dharam Vidya for thousands of years, and they planned to divide and rule and cause friction between the educators and the rest of society. And we are still seeing the consequences of that. But I'm going to make a confident prediction, and this is on the basis of the change I've seen amongst our younger generation already. And that prediction is that within 5 years we will have reversed the harm of caste consciousness. Now that may sound like an extraordinary statement, but I have said it on the basis of observation and on the basis of understanding the thoughts that have now been set into motion in our Samaj. And every person, every youngster who I've seen who has worked through this particular book, for example, they have emerged free of caste consciousness and with a huge respect for Jati Varna as a system of doing things. And I'm not going to talk too much about Jati and Varna because I could spend the rest of the conference talking to you all about Jati and Varna, and I'm not going to do that because otherwise you wouldn't read the book, and you have to go and read the book. But that's a separate story. So this conference that happened in 1844 was a gathering of missionary organizations, and they specifically architected the scheme that they had to implement caste consciousness throughout Bharatiya society in order to convert the nation. They made it a de facto assumption that to be born a Hindu was to be born in a caste. That in itself is the greatest lie that has emerged from the time of colonialism. To be born a Hindu was to be born in a caste is a lie. And let me tell you a little bit about the people who came and the things that they said. There is a chap called William Wilberforce, who the British talk about very proudly, that he was the person who ended slavery. But he was quite different. In 1813 he spoke in Parliament about Hindus, and he said, "Our Christian religion is sublime, pure and beneficent. Theirs, the Hindus, is mean, licentious and cruel." And James Canning, who was another Anglican, he declared to a gathering of Hindus, "You are all a parcel of poor, ignorant semi-barbarians. You do not even understand your own language and system, as well as an enlightened Englishman, especially one who has been educated at a regular grammar school." So here we had two white men, Christians, telling Hindus that they didn't know about their own history, their own systems of philosophy, and their own indigenous knowledge systems. Doesn't this sound a little bit familiar to the gathering of missionary-led organizations over in Rutgers who are saying to Hindus, "Oh, you don't know about Hinduism, you don't know about Hindutva. Ignore the fact that your Supreme Court has defined it. Ignore the fact that Hindutva is Hindu Tattva, which means the Tattva of being Hindu. Ignore all of that. We Christians will tell you what you don't know about yourself." Nothing has changed since 1813 in terms of the missionary mindset. The mission is exactly the same. Turning to this conference briefly, there have been some nuggets that have emerged from this conference, and I'm actually so pleased because what has happened is they have revealed their true intention. Their true intention is not educative. Their true intention is not academic. There is a hatred which has now become so blatantly expressed that it's apparent. And I'm shocked that they themselves are not able to see what their hatred has revealed about them. So in this conference we have had somebody only yesterday, an academic supposedly. He has, this academic has declared that Hindutva equals Hinduism. Well, I wish they'd make up their minds. You know, some of them are saying, no, Hindutva is different and Hinduism is different. And those who want to destroy Hinduism are saying Hinduism and Hindutva is the same thing, and we have to get rid of Hindutva. I heard a remarkable statement being made by a person who is allegedly an academic. And the essence of this statement was that all of the ills that plague India, they can only be rectified by dismantling Hinduism. This was the remark. that it's necessary to dismantle Hinduism. How on earth are they going to dismantle the third largest religion, as they call us, on the planet? How are they going to dismantle the ideology, the belief systems, the vidya of the oldest adhyatmic tradition on the planet? This is a call to what was called the final solution. This is the rhetoric that was used by the Nazis, that the only cure for the plague of the Jewish people was their extermination. Because how else can you separate a belief system, a civilizational identity, from the people themselves? It's etched into our language. Our identity, our religious vidya is etched into our language. You know, my name is Satish, Satya, Ishwar. How are you going to separate our identity from who we are without an act of violence? And this is something that was said in Rutgers University. Another remarkable statement was made by supposedly an academic, and I'm going to delight in taking this one further. And this person said that people with the surnames such as Sharma, Trivedi and Chatterjee, that we have a natural inclination, we are trained to hate Dalits, that we are violent towards Dalits. This is supposedly an academic conference, but the similarity between this conference and the racist Anglican Christianist conference that was held in 1844 seemed to be strikingly similar. You know, here in the United Kingdom there was an analysis done in which they found that I think 84% of all grooming gang assaults on vulnerable children, on vulnerable white girls, were inflicted and perpetrated by people from the Pakistani Muslim community. But government, media, the BBC, everybody said, no, we can't identify them as Pakistani Muslims because not all Pakistani Muslims are guilty. And if you call them Pakistani Muslims, then you're brandishing, you're tarring the whole community with this allegation. But when it comes to Hindus, right, you can happily say that to get rid of the problems of Bharat, you have to sort out all of the Hindus. Isn't there a discrepancy there? There is a double standard. It's a hypocritical double standard. Instead of calling them Muslims and Pakistanis, we're required to refer to them as Asians. That it were Asians who were responsible for these assaults on white girls of vulnerable ages, whilst 84% of these assaults were perpetrated by people of one particular ideology. The hypocrisy is becoming so difficult to ignore. And these are the nations who now have decided that they must prevent Hindus from reconnecting with their own ancient traditions. And these are the civilizations, the white European Christian civilizations, who are willing to try and criticize without any evidence our ancient traditions and understandings. The subtlety of our knowledge systems was beyond their capacity to grasp 200 years ago, and it's still beyond their capacity to grasp. You know, I studied and thought about this and tried to understand why this is so, and it became apparent to me that in our Guru Shishya Parampara we have the philosophy of Adhikar. And the philosophy of Adhikar is that a Shishya has to be trained to become a container into which valuable vidya can be poured. So it's like cleaning a dirty glass. Each of us, when we start, we're like a dirty glass, and if you pour pure liquid into a dirty glass, the liquid gets dirty. And so our priority has always been make the character of the student and the teacher so beautiful, so harmonious, so generous, so well-meaning, so benevolent, then you can give them vidya, and they won't cause harm, and they will always serve humanity. Now, these scholars who we're dealing with over in the West, they're no different to the barbarians who came over to Bharat such a long time ago, because their characters, there has not been any tattva shuddhi. Their samskars are still deeply racist, supremacist, colonialist. And what we are seeing is the damage that can be done by scholars who are given vidya, who are given platforms like Rutgers University, without their characters having been tested. The harm that they are doing to our Sanatani children in Rutgers is not insignificant, and it cannot be allowed to continue without being challenged. And that, I think, we're going to do. I'm going to conclude with one remark and one piece of understanding that we should all have, and that is the relevance and the understanding of the history of residential schools. While St. Francis was in Bharat, murdering, slaughtering, he was the one who invited the Spanish Inquisition, the Goan Inquisition, to come to Bharat. He didn't live to see the atrocities that they perpetrated and inflicted, but it was his request which then brought the Inquisition to Bharat. Whilst they were doing that in Bharat, over in the United States, the same Christian Anglican colonialists established these residential schools. And the purpose of the residential schools was exactly the same purpose that Macaulay articulated. Macaulay in Bharat wanted to create a type of Indian who looked like an Indian, but whose values, morals, intellect, standards and everything else were purely British. In the residential schools in the Americas, they wanted to create a type of Indian, because they called them Indians. And I shan't go into the stupidity and the complete unbelievable lack of intellect of people who went that way to find Bharat and India when actually they should have gone that way, and didn't even realize when they got there, so they carried on talking about these people as though they were Indians. In that part of the world, the same philosophy was being exercised, it was being implemented. And there was a man called Pratt by name, Pratt by nature, I believe. And he coined the phrase, kill the Indian, save the man. So he started the policy of kidnapping the children of Native Americans, of imprisoning them in concentration camps, where they were beaten if they spoke their own language. They were beaten and abused if they actually used their own names. And so the Christians at that time in the Canadas in America were engaged in the same identity erasure project that the same Anglican Christians were engaged in Bharat. And it's exactly the same policy and philosophy which Audrey Trushka's ilk and her community are trying to engage in 2021 in Rutgers University. I'm going to conclude with, we have a better understanding, don't we? We have an understanding, which is that you cannot separate us, because each of us are a part of the divine whole. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachyate Purnasya Purnam Adhaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. And we know Satyam Evam Jayate. Jo Satya hai, wohi jiyega, wohi vijay uski hogi. In conclusion, I would just remind everybody that we are also taught in Mandir, धर्म की विजय हो अधर्म का नाश हो प्राणियों में सद्भावना हो विश्व का कल्याण हो. But that's not quite right. What it should be is धर्म की विजय तब होगी जब अधर्म का नाश होगा, फिर प्राणियों में सद्भावना होगी और फिर विश्व का कल्याण होगा. और अधर्म का नाश कौन करेगा? ये हमारा धर्म है. Thank you very much for giving me so much time. I think I may have overrun a little bit, Ritaji, I am so sorry, but it was such a lovely opportunity that you gave to me. And so I'm going to conclude now. Jai Shri Ram, and thank you very much, and best wishes for the Global Hindu Conference and to all of your Kona team. Ritaji, it's 6 o'clock and I've come right up against my my deadline to leave. I really do apologize that I won't be able to take question and answers. But I look forward to an opportunity to speaking again, and I'm sure the format has been so successful that you will do this again, and it will become a regular event for all of us to push forward to help Bharat to return to the Bharat that was India. Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram. Thank you so much, Panditji. And we will catch you on Clubhouse at least. And this marathon sessions, yes, we should do at least once in a year or at least once every 6 months. Who knows? We will try to accomplish this. I think a lot of good thoughts have come out, and we could discuss this on and on. But like I said, we'll do a follow-up session on Clubhouse. Panditji, we will catch you there. Thank you, and please enjoy.
Thank you,
your
Richa ji,
evening.
and namaskar to everybody else. Thank you for listening.